Welcome to another episode of Healing Through Love. Each week, we share ideas, experiences, and resources to increase the awareness of domestic and family violence and to empower survivors to grow and thrive. We talk with experts who share their advice, or with people who have experienced abuse, no matter where they are on their journey. This is all about healing through love. And now, here are your hosts, Sharlene Lynch and Rose Davidson.
When we feel better in ourselves, we show up better in our lives. Jackson Goding shares his tips in episode 33.
Realities of it all, but Gabor Mate is probably the addiction and trauma specialist, male therapist in the world, and he speaks really, really well. And I will nowhere near speak as eloquently as he does about this topic. But I think if we look back, it comes down to the two basic fundamental needs of humans, which is to have attachment, so to be loved and to belong, and to be authentic, to be able to, be true to ourselves and express ourselves in a way that feels like we can be in the world how we want to be in the world. Now, sometimes those things can go in harmony, but a lot of the time they don't. So if our attachment figures or our caregivers or even really early relationships have this idea of how they want to be in relationship with someone else, and whether that be true or not true for the other, is attachment will always be so highly important, and we will choose attachment over our authenticity.
The Healing Through Love podcast with Sharlene Lynch and Rose Davidson. The Healing Through Love podcast with host Sharlene Lynch and Rose Davidson would love to acknowledge Global Glamping Charities Incorporated for generously supporting this podcast. Global Glamping Charities, solving homelessness in all of its forms. Reach out to them at globalglamping.org.
Hello and welcome to the Healing Through Love podcast. I'm your host, Sharlene Lynch from sharlenelynch.com. Healing Through Love is here to help victims and survivors of family and domestic violence to find their way back to living a more fulfilling and meaningful life. We interview experts and survivors who share their personal stories and offer advice to those who've experienced abuse, no matter where they are on their healing journey. As well as the Healing Through Love podcast, we offer an annual Pamper Day here in Adelaide, South Australia, and soon to be in different states of Australia. And we've just had interest overseas as well, where we create for survivors of family and domestic violence. Local businesses come along and provide their services and resources to give much needed comfort, our day of indulgence for our survivors. We are looking for organisations to help us. So if you're local or interstate, please reach out to us if you have a healing modality and you would like to be in the proximity to help these people grow and move forward. Today, I've got a very special guest, Jackson Goding. Jackson lives in Sydney and has a consulting business there. He's a clinical therapist and he works in and around self-worth to help you show up better in relationships. And we're going to have a conversation today to talk about helping you thrive and make connections with other people so that you can be the best you can. Hello, Jackson. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing so well. Thank you so much for having me, Sharlene.
Oh, it's such a privilege and a pleasure to have a connection with you. So, yay, Sydney. I was just there last week. How's the weather in Sydney today?
Look, it's a bit stuffy. I've got to be honest. I am definitely a bit hot today. It's been very hot and sticky the last probably few weeks, and then all of a sudden. So
it was just in the 4 days I was there, it had rain and then sunshine and then clouds and then back to rain. It was up and down, and that's okay. There was so much greenage. It was just a beautiful place to be. And I love the rocks. It's a fabulous place to eat. I had entree at one place, main course at the next, and a dessert at a different one. So it's just a fabulous place to get out and about and eat and see the water. So Jackson, how long have you been a clinical therapist?
Hey, so I have been a clinical therapist for 6 years and been studying pretty much straight out the gates from school. So yeah, been doing this for a long time. So definitely a big passion of mine.
Oh, I love it. So, it takes a special someone with a great degree of empathy and compassion to choose this road, because sometimes this can be a challenging way to make a difference and earn an income. Like, what's driven you in your background to move towards being a clinical therapist?
So look, you got the short answer and the long answer, so I'll probably give you both. But the thing for me is I would always say from a really young age, I always wanted to help people. So that just made sense that I wanted to get into psychology and psychotherapy, and that's what I did. But I guess through that journey of like self-discovery, and the more I kind of had my experiences, I guess I started to really realize what really drove me into here. And I think that my background is all in that there was a lot of underlying not good enough, not mattering, and not being lovable kind of messaging that I didn't realize until later on into a couple of years of my own therapy. And that really was like the missing link for me. So I'd been in therapy, looking at depression, looking at anxiety, looking at the experiences, the relationship that I've been in and out of. And the missing link underneath it all was, how do I feel truly about myself? And how do I start to show up in that way and not really focus every single thing about needing to be needed or putting everything externally instead of internally? So that kind of drove me even further into wanting to specialize and focus based on that trauma of what's going on rather than what's happening right now. And that's really gone alongside my, I guess, passion to want to give back and want to also find out more and more about me, because I think it's not necessarily lived experience, it's kind of living experience. So I use that as well as like the real passion that I have just to study and to learn about human connection in general. And those two alongside each other is where I land today.
So this is about having a different level of self-worth so that you can have a different level of communication and connection with others. Is that right?
Yeah, essentially, yeah. I think if we can show up for ourselves and love ourselves, it's a lot easier and a lot comes more naturally to just be able to like be contagious in that way and be loving in that way. And then that naturally just allows us to have better and stronger relationships and connection to not just people, but everything in life.
Yes, when we love ourselves first, we see things through different eyes. So how would you say the difference is between self-esteem and self-worth?
Yeah, so I think self-esteem, I think they do interchange a little bit. I think that the self-esteem is really about like how we esteem ourselves, essentially, is what we find ourselves in and where we see little things on the surface of where we want to get better in. So the low self-esteem might be, I've got low self-esteem around relationships, or I've got low self-esteem around talking and communicating with other people, or around our careers or whatever. Whereas I think that the self-worth component is much more at the core of ourselves. So much more about how we value ourselves as a whole, rather than just the little bits and pieces that make up who we are. It's that underlying core value of, am I good enough? Am I worthy? I think that that's sort of the key difference is do I see myself as valuable just for being, or only valuable based on the things that I'm doing?
Okay. So have you got tools and techniques that you share with your clients? Are they all in and around talking therapies, or are there other things that you've picked up along the way?
Yeah. So I work very somatically with the body and trying to reconnect us from like that mind and body, so that we can really kind of understand these words we have around emotion, like fear and shame and joy and love even. So being able to really kind of know, when I feel this word that I'm saying, like, how do I know that, and what's going on in my body? So I really kind of love working in that somatic way, as well as the talk therapies, naturally, to be able to get that self-awareness where we need it to get to, and then really kind of breaking it down into what I see as like a model of self-worth is we need quite a lot of things in order to do that. The list of things would be having knowledge, right? Having an understanding about what's going on and what's gone on. The self-awareness, obviously starting to understand what that deeper stuff is and bringing a light to it. Then you've got lots of different other things like self-care, self-leadership, self-accountability, self-protection, and then self-love. I think all of those kind of not necessarily like a stepped approach, but looking at each domain or pillar, if you will, to be able to figure out where am I really well, and where am I doing things that are really, really good, like boundaries or looking after myself, and where do I kind of need that consistent work to be able to be a bit more predictable in my life, like the accountability side of things, or taking leadership to love myself. So I do think it takes that model of really looking at each domain of where we see ourselves, not just within, but also how we show ourselves and how we show up as well.
So you've now been working as a clinical therapist for more than 6 years. You would notice some, you feel, I don't know, more enamored of some clients than others that have perhaps maybe a particular challenge. Is there an area in the last 6 years that you found yourself more drawn to?
I mean, I definitely think that self-worth and relationships, which is definitely the way that I niche down, I guess, and really specialize in. But underneath all that is really the big, word that we throw around a lot these days, and has lots of different types of levels of where we throw it around. But it's that trauma, it's what's going on in the past that shapes the way that we are today. What's happened, but then what's sort of left inside of us when that's happened. So that can be anything really, but that is generally the theme. Is people might show up with depression, anxiety, relationship issues, stress, all these things. I think that no matter what you show up with, we can find a path right back to how do I feel about myself, and how does my worth and my value and how lovable and how good I am combined and relate to that. And I think rather than going, let's work on your anxiety, which of course we want to be able to do and create safety and stability, it's then instead of that like being solved or being more maintained, and then it spits its head back up into depression or substance use, it's trying to prevent that whole thing from happening by really going, the core theme underneath it all is, how do I keep seeing me? How do I keep seeing myself? And that's where I think that it doesn't matter what you show up with, we will find a way back to how do I look and value me? And then generally what a lot of people come into therapy because is it's impacting my relationships. It's impacting my ability to be in a relationship, or impacting, the relationship that I'm already in, where they're unable to connect to me in the exact way that works really well for them in that healthy way. So I do think it really kind of comes back down to working on both of those things.
Yeah. So listeners, if you're listening today or watching us today and you are a survivor, you're probably hearing that in a lot of the language we're talking about here, that we need to take some level of responsibility for what's been happening around us by how we feel about ourselves, so that when we change how we feel about ourselves, when we lift that level of self-worth and self-esteem, it enables us to see things differently, increase our boundaries, and make different choices about whose proximity we're in. And it does start with us. Now, I know when I first heard that as a survivor of domestic violence, I felt that it was a little accusatory. I felt that, how dare you speak to me like that? This is going back a way. Because, hey, I'm the victim here. And we have this conversation week in and week out, when we can shift our thought processes in and around seeing ourselves as victors and survivors. It changes our language, changes our thought processes. And we see that, yes, there is a part that we play in what's happened, what's transpired. And it can be even just being in the proximity, or having that thought frequency that's lower and attracting people that do want to abuse us. So yes, I know we're having that conversation again. Yes, and it is important to stand up and increase your own level of self-worth and self-esteem so that you can be that survivor, that victor, and move forward. I love it. Yeah. So talking therapies, I love somatic healing. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you bring the somatics into the talking therapies?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm trained in what's called sensory motor psychotherapy, which is just a bunch of words really. But the idea behind that is being able to work with the body, right? We store a lot of our trauma or our pain or our stress even in the body, and being able to kind of go back in a really safe way. And obviously safety and stability is always primary focus for traumatized clients. And there's a lot of clients that want to jump straight to the trauma, and you really got to be in a space where there is that safety and stability. And that can be, an annoying process, but also a really protective process for the client and for obviously the therapeutic relationship. But from there, once we get to that space where there's lots of trust and rapport and safety, which does naturally take quite some time with definitely me as a male that's working with females of survivors of domestic violence, that does take some time. So to be able to go into a space where it's really mindful and really reflective of what's coming up when we do kind of slither towards the event itself, or even just look at the relational part that's continuing to be a pattern, and then really noticing, well, what's coming up in the body? Do I withdraw from that? As you're kind of body language expert, right? It's that really being able to pick up and notice what happens internally and how aware are we that we're doing that, and really having a safe space so we can give feedback to comment on what is going on with that body and with that mind, and even every little tiny nuanced thing that we do, and then reflecting and going a little bit more deeper and being curious about, well, what's that about, and really understanding that. And in that way, we can really start to release, obviously through some breath, through some grounding exercises. We're really starting to be more familiar with our bodies, and rightfully so, and super acknowledging that being with body is really scary and can be really, really unsafe for a lot of people to actually even tune in, because they've done such an excellent job of protecting themselves by dissociating. So being able to do that is a gift, and obviously something that it does take that required time to be able to get to a point where we can be a bit more free, get the load off a tiny little bit and just start to breathe essentially, and be able to move a little bit more freely in just the everyday life. And it's kind of like a microscope in counseling. It's like what you see in here is what we can bring out in there. And that integration and transformation work does take some time and some really, really hard work where a lot of, I guess, daring and bravery is needed.
So true. As above, so below. So, Jackson, what I'm hearing with what you're saying, correct me if I'm wrong, is that our end results, as we're experiencing them now as people who are surviving or in the middle of domestic violence and family violence, that this might not be where the pattern began, that the pattern might be older, and that this is now just a manifestation. This is a showing of those patterns that have been created earlier. Can you perhaps maybe speak about what could be seen that could have created this later trauma that we might have picked up? I know that's very broad, but could you give us some examples?
Yeah, I think I can hone in on that a little bit without taking up too much time or getting too lost in all the technicalities of it all. But Gabor Mate is probably the addiction and trauma specialist male therapist in the world, and he speaks really, really well, and I would nowhere near speak as eloquently as he does about this topic. But I think if we look back, it comes down to the two basic fundamental needs of humans, which is to have attachment, so to be loved and to belong, and to be authentic, to be able to be true to ourselves and express ourselves in a way that feels like we can be in the world how we want to be in the world. Now, sometimes those things can go in harmony, but a lot of the time they don't. So if our attachment figures or our caregivers or even really early relationships have this idea of how they want to be in relationship with someone else, and whether that be true or not true for the other, is attachment will always be so highly important, and we will choose attachment over our authenticity quite a lot of time, especially as young children that depend on it in order to survive. So for an example of that might be, let's say dad or mum really doesn't like it when you are overly emotional, and therefore in order to be in a relationship with them, you have to dull down your emotions, which you are authentically, and have the right and have choice and boundaries and all these sort of things in a functional relationship, in a functional family system. This should be explored and celebrated, and also guided in a way that creates it into a way that can be healthy. But when it's not, because it's too uncomfortable, or we can't teach what we don't know, so our parents might not have gotten those lessons, and their parents, we can keep going back and back and back. So coming back to that is, if they are too uncomfortable with you being overly emotional, then we will choose attachment, and we will start to learn and adapt. How do I show less emotion and shut down a bit of me in order to be with you? So if we can look at what that starts to happen is more and more and more about how I be in a relationship, how I get love and how I belong is I need to be a people pleaser. I need to be not speak up. I'm not allowed to have a voice. So we can see very clearly how that may start to shape when we start to enter intimate relationships or start to enter even friendships. And if we still play that role in order to be in relationship, as opposed to being true to us, the role self has been there a lot longer and it's been driving for much stronger amount of times. The true self might try to come out, but we'll keep pushing it back to be in that role because we are under threat if we think we'll lose relationships. This is where we sit a lot of the time with our domestic violence and just in, toxic relationships in general, that we will keep choosing that role. And that unfortunately means that we sacrifice parts of us in order to do that. And some people don't know what that true self or authentic self really even looks like because it's been such a significant role that they've had to play for such a long time. So breaking the layers of that, as you can understand, is a really tricky and lengthy process to safely let that part of me come out.
I love it. So in someone's journey, when would they start working with you? When they're still in that situation or when they're out the other side? Like at what point in time do people normally work with you when they're going through trauma?
Look, like I kind of said, people will find me with their presenting concerns, right? So what's on the surface at the moment, and there might not be a complete link to the fact that there is patterns there and there is stuff that's happened that is based on our experiences shaped the way that things are right now. Those sort of depressions, anxieties, relationship issues, stresses, they might be on the forefront, and that might be really important for someone to work through. So there's that. There's definitely people that are coming in with there, and we slowly link and see if that's where they're wanting to go, and obviously being led by them. And then there's others that are very understanding of the fact that this has probably got something to do with the unresolved things that I know have happened and I don't quite know, or I do know enough about, but are still blocked or stuck. So I do think that it can be a range. Obviously, in terms of when is completely up to readiness and willingness to go into. When it comes to domestic violence, of course, it's also around safety. Is it safe to even call? Is it safe to email? That sort of thing is really, really important.
So you mentioned before that you do with your somatic work breathing. Is there a breath work exercise that you would suggest perhaps for our listeners who might need a little bit of calming down and just leaning back into that higher level of self-worth and self-esteem? Is there something that you can suggest?
Yeah, for sure. I think I'm not going to go with the classic box breathing. I think that most people have an idea of that, but just very, very quickly, it's breathing in and creating a box in the breath of in, out, or in, hold, out, hold, in, right? So that's really good, really, really effective, quite easy to do. But the one that I've been utilizing myself in my meditation every day at the end of my meditation, it's a little bit more breath work, is it's called 4-7-8 breathing, which essentially is inhaling for 4 and then holding for 7 and then exhaling for 8. So you're doubling your exhale compared to your inhale. And what that does essentially is the inhale kind of more represents the danger or the threat, and the exhale is much more about that rest and digest, calming state. So if we're having more of an exhale than our inhale, the body is starting to regulate because naturally we are telling it that we're more safe. We're telling it that we're more okay right now. So for some people that aren't able to do that intensity of hold, we want to cut that down. We might do inhale for 3 and then maybe exhale for 6, whatever works for you, but essentially work it like that. This is a really effective way to have an immediate result, right? I think any sort of breath where we're consciously breathing as opposed to unconsciously, which we do every day to survive, right? But that step of in for 4, hold for 7, out for 8 is a really effective way to start regulating the nervous system, because really that's what we're working with is the dysregulated nervous system. A lot of it.
So true, Jackson. And you've got a free offering for our listeners today. Can you tell us a little bit more about the free offering? And that link will be in the show notes and also in the description. But if you could share us a little bit about the free offering that you've got today.
Sure. So as I've said, and I think that there's quite a lot that we're dealing with that comes back down to self-worth and how we're showing up in relationships. So as I spoke about in terms of self-worth, this is like a free guide for indicators that you might have impacted self-worth. The other one is what's called codependency. Now, codependency, if I can just summarize it really, really quickly, the example that I use is when someone's really cold. Let's say, Sharlene, you're really cold, and as a codependent person, which I am in recovery for, so let's just pretend I'm not at the moment, and I'm a bit, all over the place with my boundaries and whatnot, and not understanding is a normal person, or normal is probably a bad word, but let's say the person who's not codependent might offer you a jacket, right? But a codependent person, metaphorically, instead of providing you a jacket, they will sit next to you and light themselves on fire to keep you warm, right? So they light themselves on fire to keep you warm while they burn, but you're warm. And as long as you're warm, I'm okay, even though I'm slowly burning. So it's the idea of, I will do whatever it takes to make sure that you're okay. I need you to be okay. That's where I get my worth from, is if everything else or everyone else is all right, then I can be okay. So we see things like people pleasing, or just having that sort of base of human existence dependent on our relationship. So that, in a very small nutshell, is codependency. So this is, again, a guide of 4 indicators that you might have that codependency, and where to kind of go from there to look into it a little bit deeper, and what are some of the skills and tools that we can do to get aware of that and start to put some stuff in place. So they're the free guides, which really give you access into my world and what I'm doing and how I'm working in that sort of space, and then lots of different stuff from there around how you can work with me and what else is going on, and stuff that's coming up that can really deepen that work and really start to integrate in some of the stuff that's going on for people.
Yes. All right. I love it. Now, you've got a book coming up and also a program. And listeners, if you want to stay in Jackson's proximity, all you need to do is follow him on Instagram. What's the Instagram handle?
So it's Find Reason Therapy. And yeah, so right on there is a whole bunch of my content, and me being a doofus, me being serious, and then access to my bio, I guess, what's called a link tree that has lots of these different resources. So that's there. The book is on there. It is an ebook. And this is all about how to radically put yourself first. So that's there, again, as a really cool entry level when maybe therapy isn't right up your alley right now. So it's a good way to kind of step in just a little bit to see where you're at and start to work within yourself a little bit more, and then some options of where to go with that from there.
Jackson, that's fantastic. So we've learned a lot from you today in a short space of time. I'd just love to lean in and ask, have you got any closing words for our listeners?
Look, I think that the fact that you're listening to this podcast, or the fact that you're engaged in your own journey of healing and recovery, you wouldn't believe how much work you've already done just by showing up and doing that. So I guess I'd just be able to stay in that space and stay connected, because connection is really, the opposite of so many of our problems that we face, isolation, loneliness, addiction. So being able to kind of stay connected and stay true to yourself and try and be the best and most authentic version of you. And to do that, we need to be in relationship, in connection, in these places that are going to provide that safety for us and that comfort for us.
I love it. Thank you for listening today, listeners, and thank you, Jackson, for your time. If you are a therapist yourself and you are local to Adelaide, please reach out. We are looking for additional therapists. And if you're interested in having a conversation of what running one of these pamper days could look like in your state or country, please reach out as well. And if you've got your own story and would like to be a guest on Healing Through Love podcast, we would love to hear from you. You can contact us. Our details are in the show notes and also in the description. That's a goodbye from us. Bye for now.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Healing Through Love. You can get further resources, see the show notes, or simply reach out to us via our website at htlaustralia.org. Thanks so much for joining us, and we look forward to your company next time on the Healing Through Love podcast.